Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to our second decarbonization webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, earlier this year, we've organized a webinar on decarbonization strategy, measures, and giving a quick overview of different decarbonization software tools. And a lot of you at the end of that webinar wish to have a deeper overview of some of the software tools. So that's why we're organizing the second webinar of this year on decarbonization from measurement to reporting together with our partner Sweep. In today's webinar, we will be joined by Christina, who is a senior consultant at BearingPoint specializing on CSRD reporting, and Patrick from Sweep, who's leading the DACH region. If you would like to interact throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the emoji reaction in the middle. And in terms of the agenda, we've organized the things in three main parts: why decarbonization matters now more than ever, how to execute from measurement to meaningful action, and showcasing your progress via CSRD-ready reporting. We really wanted to keep things short and sweet for you, so that's why we are keeping it to 30 minutes. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, please use the questions function. You can find it in the bottom right corner of your screen. We will answer all of your questions in writing via email after the webinar. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. And let's start with why decarbonization matters now more than ever. To answer this question, we will look at on two sides. On the first side, we will look at the risk of inactions for companies from not engaging in decarbonization, as well as the benefits for companies that do engage in it. There are three main reasons that you should pay attention with when it comes to inaction for decarbonization. The first one is physical climate risk. We all know that there are increased floods, heat, storms, and water stress due to climate change. And this puts in turn increased pressure on companies to develop robust transition and adaptation plans for decarbonization. The second thing is increased financing costs. Both banks and investors are shifting portfolios towards low carbon businesses, and companies that are lagging on decarbonization might face higher interest rates, lower valuation, and potential exclusion from ESG investment funds. And last risk, but not least, an argument that for sure you've heard a lot in the last years, but it's still a relevant one: increasing EU and national climate-related regulations, such as CSRD. And yes, CSRD has been reduced, and there are a lot of talks, and there's the omnibus package, and less companies are now in scope. But CSRD is one regulatory requirement regarding carbon. There are other ones, such as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the EU Emissions Trading System. And an important point is that some countries are already quite fast integrating these laws into national law, such as Spain, which mandates for large companies scope 1 and 2 emissions, as well as like public bodies. Nevertheless, for companies that do engage in decarbonization, there are also benefits. First major benefit is customer attractiveness, both in B2B and B2C context. For B2B companies, there are increasing requirements from customers to give transparency regarding corporate carbon footprints as well as product carbon footprints. Companies that provide this transparency and also provide better numbers will have an edge compared to the ones that don't. In the B2C context, we see increased customer loyalty from customer segments that are valuing sustainability and are even willing to pay more for it, which allows companies to potentially justify product price premiums for specific products and segments. Second, less CO2 via circularity. For all manufacturing companies, circular economy is a large decarbonization driver alongside electrification. And circular economy has multiple sides benefits, such as saving resources and costs, supply chain resilience, new revenue stream, and protecting biodiversity. And last but not least, higher innovation. Decarbonization forces companies to rethink all business models, processes, and therefore increase product innovation and increase business model innovation. which leads to a potential advantage compared to industry peers that are less innovative. Question is, how do we get there? How do we avoid this risk, and how do we get the benefits? Well, in order for companies to build a robust and credible net zero transition plan, they need to consider strategic elements, indicators and targets, and governance and steering consideration across 5 different steps. Starting with the current situation, understanding what's their maturity level regarding greenhouse gas emissions, what are industry benchmarks, what carbon footprint methodology they need to follow, and also making sure that the top management at board level understands why carbon accounting and decarbonization is important. Second step, climate risk. Identify which are the relevant climate risks for your company and for your business model, understand what's your exposure to those risks, and also have an appropriate risk committee and include risks into your risk governance model. Third, here's where things start to get a little bit more complicated. Long-term net zero vision. Understand what's the long-term vision for decarbonization. What sort of adjustments do you need to do to your business model to reach that? What is the transition roadmap and things that you have to do in order to go towards this future business model? And what are the different decarbonization as well as like business growth scenarios for your company? Then you need to understand what are the different carbon trajectories, residual emissions, avoided emissions, as well as what are the financial implications in terms of capital expenditure and operational expenses needed to implement this. Once you have a net zero vision and decarbonization trajectories, you need a decarbonization strategy. You need to develop the policies that will support that net zero transition plan, that would support those decarbonization trajectories with clear carbon targets and milestones, also interim ones, not only final ones. And you need to have board engagement and a governance to implement the measures. Last but not least, a strategy is nothing without an action plan and clear KPIs and regular tracking. You need drilled down roadmaps with KPIs and milestones for your decarbonization targets. And finally, you will have to also communicate them both internally and externally via reporting. You can see that these steps don't only require specific know-how, but also high quality data and a lot of data management and data processes in terms of the trajectories, the carbon targets, the KPIs, the risks, the reporting. Data and data management becomes really essential. And that is where Sweep can support a lot and simplify things. And with that, I would like to hand over to Patrick, take us to the next section.
Thank you so much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. Alex is really well established why decarbonization is obviously critical to you, and importantly, how you can get a transition plan that really fits all of these requirements. But the challenges that most businesses face is that there's obviously a framework with lots of moving parts. You saw all of these different boxes, and that is really where we see manual processes that are driven often by Excel and manual interactions with people across the company. It is where these manual processes break down. And this is really where we shift from a view on the strategy around all of this into how we are able to execute. And this is where Sweep comes in. We're a market-leading platform that focuses around the data management for sustainability. And we work with companies such as L'Oréal, Swisscom, and Lacoste to support them to build a single source of truth for all of their data that they can then use to measure their carbon footprint, act on it, and disclose. This is the framework that we're following to provide you with, of course, a comprehensive GHG and ESG management solution that can help you visualize your emissions across the whole organizational structure. Make sure that you can then take this data to build trajectories for simulations, to model different scenarios around the development of your company, new products that you're launching, or new regional initiatives that you're beginning, and obviously translate all of that into actionable initiative management across all of these actions. The last point then is the disclosure part of things, where we want to make sure that we can, in an auditable way, represent all of the actions that we're taking in the company to bring this to, of course, one, the disclosure frameworks like CSRD, GRI, and many other standards, but also internally to your employees and externally to partners and customers. So we're starting with the measure part of things, and this is just a really short extract because today we really want to focus on the decarbonization and the disclosure side of things. But really importantly here is that Sweep helps you to build this multidimensional analysis across your company. Whether you are a product-driven company or a regional-driven company, we can represent all of these different organizational hierarchies in the platform itself and make sure that you can see emissions at a deeper level than just the category of the GHG protocol. To be able to compare the performance between different parts of the company, different business units or sites, and use that to power your insights here. And each node here shows you the breakdown of emissions, the ownership attached to it, and of course, scope splits and subcategories, which you can then use to see your current situation and simulate going forward based on your initiatives. This is then, of course, connected with a really comprehensive dashboarding functionality that you can use to break these things down even further, bringing in some of your customized IDs that you use across the company and perspectives that you take on this data, and also to build reports and dashboards that you can then personalize for different stakeholders. An energy manager in one of your facilities needs different dashboards and views than, for example, your CFO or Chief Sustainability Officer who is looking at KPIs from a high level on a quarterly basis. Additionally, we are making this much easier for customers to also build their dashboards with just text input into an AI. So what we can see here is, for example, that you can query in our dashboard functionality with text towards our AI. So here we're starting to just query our emissions across the month for each of the emissions. We put that in, the AI pre-configures a dashboard and brings it out to us. We can then further interact and say, I would like to only see my data for Q4. And as you can see, the dashboards then automatically adjust. At all times, you can access the granular data that is behind all of these dashboards to, of course, be able to show to auditors what is the data behind the high-level number. This really gives you a fast way to interact with the data, but also for people that are not so familiar with your data model, a way to engage with this data scalably. This is just a really short overview of what we can do to help you collect and represent your data on your carbon footprint better. We'd be happy to dive in deeper with you in the future. But of course, we're focusing today on how to use this data to then decarbonize. A first real important bit is our initiative and growth scenario modulation that we can offer in the platform. So here we're turning these first insights into tangible strategies. And for that, for example, it's important to model your net zero trajectories that you might have with a goal here at 2030, showcasing where you're trending currently here in the thick blue line, and then seeing how my initiatives are trending towards the goal that we're having, which is all well and good, of course, in a static environment. But really importantly, you will have scenarios that your company is planning for in the next years. So opening up new growth markets, acquiring companies, or launching new products. This is where the forecasting functionality in Sweep can use these different models so that you're on the one hand able to showcase a business as usual scenario, but also different other scenarios in the future that you want to see. And this really shows you the gaps that are emerging in your decarbonization strategies, but also which initiatives you want to double down on in the future. What helps you to do that and to define these in more detail is then, of course, a simulation engine that gives you access to all of that data that you've painstakingly collected across scope 1, 2, and 3, that you're then able to, of course, see as a visual representation in terms of where your hotspots lies, and then giving you a sandbox environment that you can use to figure out, what if I reduce my emissions in a certain area of the company? What if I change from a fuel that is more environmentally harmful to a better performing fuel, for example? And you're able to really get concrete insights on how that will change your emission trajectory and the targets that you're following. Then, of course, once we have defined these initiatives, it's all about seeing how far we are away from these targets and what initiatives are giving you a good return of your investment. You're able to manage these initiatives at scale for different geographies or facilities in the platform, able to assign ownership and also collect financial metrics for each of these initiatives in terms of how much an initiative costs in terms of CapEx and OpEx, and being able to weigh that up to then make the right decisions regarding your executive communications for these initiatives. Really importantly, what more and more customers are doing nowadays is, of course, that particularly given scope 3 is the largest part of their footprint, it is not only your internal actions that will define whether you will hit your net zero targets or not, but the commitments of your suppliers, and particularly the large suppliers, that will influence your trajectories here quite intensively. So Sweep also offers you a link to the SBTi catalog, where you can access targets from your suppliers in all the different formats that they have submitted to CDP, to then see what if my suppliers achieve their targets, what if 50% of the suppliers achieve their targets, and what gaps you might need to fill, but also what suppliers you might need to push more to set more ambitious goals. And this is really a full functionality overview in terms of how Sweep can help you with decarbonization, breakdowns, planning, strategy, and execution. And an important part then, of course, is to translate this functionality into regulatory reporting. And this is where Christina is taking over to showcase how we can bring these things into CSRD.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Patrick. So after we've now looked at how you can measure and reduce your carbon emissions, we now, as Patrick said, want to look at reporting. While, of course, measuring is the most important, or is a really important part of your carbon footprint calculations, it's just as important to get an overview of your data as well as of your data collection processes. And this is something where the Sweep disclosure feature comes in and is really helpful. As you can see here, with that disclosure feature here for the GHG protocol, you get a good overview of all the data points that you're collecting, as well as of the status of your process. So if we have a quick look here at the screenshot, we see first a general overview of your emissions, the relevant categories that you're covering, as well as, for example, of the emission factor type, so whether it's a physical or monetary emission factor. And then within the measurements, so within all the lines that are listed here, the status of your different categories, your different GHG categories. We see the status, the scope, then again written out the GHG category, the status once more in written, whether it's relevant, not relevant, whether it's been measured. And then, of course, really important, the value, meaning how many tons of CO2 equivalent have now actually been measured in that specific scope. This data here is, of course, fed by the data that you fed into Sweep, and with that gives you an overview of where your data collection process is at this point. This overview can be based either on your spend or your activity data, and Patrick touched upon this before briefly, but with Sweep, you as well can import your historical data. So if you've done a carbon emission calculation in the previous years, either with a different tool or manually, this is something that we can import into the system, which will then allow you to track changes, to compare these changes over time, and to just showcase your development. And that's what we want to focus now onto in this last part, you can integrate this into different voluntary or mandatory disclosure frameworks. There are a variety of carbon and sustainability related frameworks out there, and a variety of them are, of course, covered in Sweep. We have, for example, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Global Reporting Initiative, the ISSB, the California Climate Laws, and of course, as well, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And yeah, while many of you know, of course, the CSRD is a bit on wobbly feet these days, it is and will maintain an important framework for sustainability reporting in the European Union and beyond. So we still want to look at this. Within the CSRD, or the CSRD is closely connected with the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And what these are is it's basically a list of topics within the topics of environment, social, and governance that can be important for a company, that a company might have to report on. So the first step when reporting, according to the CSRD and the ESRS, is to figure out which of these data points are actually relevant for me as a company. Where do my priorities lie? And so the first step within approaching this framework is to conduct the double materiality assessment. In short, the DMA. With the DMA, I won't go into the details of how the assessment is done, but with the DMA, you do evaluate all these different topics and come to the result of a matrix, as you can see it here. Within that matrix, it's visualized where your priorities within ESG, within these standards of the CSRD, lie. You can see here an example of this DMA matrix. We have at the bottom left the least relevant points, and then on the top right, the most relevant points. So going from bottom left to top right. Each of these data points does include a lot more information. So if you are in the system, you can then easily click on all of these different points and get either directly to that data point, or at least with just a small overview, see what is the governance of this. So whether a data point is material, whether it's not material, etc. One small addition I want to mention here, which is a very nice feature of Sweep, is that you can connect your data points not only to the CSRD, so to that framework, but also connect it to other frameworks. One of the use cases where I see this most is, of course, the topic of climate change, as the CO2 data is connected to the GHG protocol as well as to the CSRD. Then if we move a bit further, we can look at the CSRD overview. So here, as we've seen it with the GHG protocol, you can have this disclosure option and this disclosure feature as we had it for GHG for the CSRD as well. One of the challenges one of the most common challenges with data collection in general, but especially when looking at the CSRD, is to maintain oversight, to understand who's responsible, where are we with our data and gathering, and what still needs to be done. And that's something that can nicely be covered through this overview. You see here all the different standards, all the different books are listed. You can assign owners for each of the standards. You can, of course, also assign owners for each of the data points, but here we have it at the standard level. And you can get an overview at how many data points are material and what the status is. At the top, you also see the general overview, so that we're not split into the different parts, but we just have an overview of all the data points, where we are, where we have data, where we're still in draft, what is already finished, and also what is audited in this case. If we go a bit deeper, we can also see each data point on a lot more granular level, so to say. So each of these high-level data points is linked to a interface where we can see a lot more information on it. We here have an example from the social standard, looking at the number of employees over 50 years. You see all the different individual measurements that can be taken with this. You see the governance, whether it's material or not, and whether it's in draft or not. A little side note here, data collection in Sweep can function through various options. You can have integrations, you can have the data uploaded through Excel or CSV, but as well, you can, of course, send out surveys directly to your stakeholders, to your colleagues, to get that data. And there's a lot of templates that can be used through Sweep to make this a bit easier for you. Lastly, and that's a point that was that I touched upon a little bit before, is the audit traceability. So that's something that's really important within these regulations, and it can be done, or it can be used in Sweep for a variety of things. Of course, we can use it for CSRD, but you can just as well have this audit traceability function for the other modules. So it works for carbon, it works for CSRD, and for everything else that we've seen. This audit traceability allows you to have a history of your data points. So you see within each data point the activity that has happened. So you can see what happened, what has changed over time, when these changes were taken, and also, very importantly, by whom they were taken. On the one side, this allows you and your colleagues to have a really good oversight of where your data came from, what happened, if mistakes happened, where did that actually occur, and how can you correct it? And as well, of course, it is very useful for the auditor. External auditors can be onboarded on Sweep, and through these features, they can have direct access to your data collection processes, and with that, have a great transparency on the whole process. So it not only helps you with the auditor, but also with your own data quality. And with that, I want to wrap up the short introduction on how the reporting within Sweep works. We've now seen, why decarbonization is still really important, how it can be done in Sweep, and what reporting in Sweep means. And with that, I give it back to you, Alex. You're still on mute, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Christina. For those of you who are joining us the second time, you know that we've asked you previously for your feedback as to what to focus on for the next webinar, and we would like to do the same today. So you notice we have a quick survey regarding what are your 2026 sustainability priorities that we will use as input for our upcoming webinar. And we would like to know, what would you like us to focus on? Decarbonization, setup or execution, regulatory requirements such as CSRD, EUDR, and CBAM, other regulatory requirements not focused on reporting, but more on operational aspects like packaging and packaging waste regulation, ESG data and ESG data management, digitalization, or if you have other topics that are not mentioned here, which are your main priority for next year, please mention it in the Q&A section. Well, with that, our time is almost up. So I would like once again to thank Patrick and Christina for taking us through Sweep. Thank you, everyone, for your time, for spending the 30 minutes with us. We hope that this was highly insightful for you. And if you have questions or if you're interested, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks a lot, and have a very nice day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.